So she's basically Rebute Gilliman for the sisters, except she comes packing missile launchers and costs over 100 points less. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're here to talk about arguably the strongest sisters HQ in Morvenn Vahl. Games Workshop do seem to be making an effort to make their faction commanders extra strong this edition. Both Mortarion and the Silent King seem to be staples for the Necrons and Death Guard respectively, and it certainly looks like Morvenn Vahl might be an auto-include in quite a lot of sisters lists. In this video we'll talk over her abilities and datasheet, then about her damage output in melee, any buffs and synergies that can make her even more scary, and then the ridiculously strong buffs that she can hand out to other units. So Morvenn Vahl is an HQ choice for the Sisters of Battle. She's 265 points or 13 power, and she happens to have the Supreme Commander tag, which means that you can take her in a separate Supreme Command detachment and it won't cost you any more command points. Provided you've got a detachment going spare, she isn't going to be hard to include in a Sisters list. Her stat line is that of a souped-up Paragon Warsuit. She's got a movement of 8, weapon skill and ballistic skill 2+, strength and toughness 5, 8 wounds, 5 attacks, leadership 9, a 2+ save and a 4+ invul save, and her durability is further augmented by halving the damage that she takes, rounding up, and a 4+ feel no pain type save against mortal wounds. Between all these, it means that very little will kill her efficiently. Anti-tank fire gets caught on the invul save and halves the damage. Small arms aren't going to do much against the 2+ armor, and even mortal wounds aren't really very efficient. She is helpfully fairly fast for a big and fighty buffing HQ, and she's got enough attacks to count in melee, as we'll get onto in a second. Keywords wise, like the Paragon Warsuit, she does count as a vehicle, which is a little bit unhelpful for locking her out of certain abilities. She is a character with less than 10 wounds, so she will be able to get character protection. She has the Sanctified keyword instead of having an order. That means that you can include her alongside other orders and not break them. And she is a Paragon Warsuit. She gets all the standard Sisters rules, Acts of Faith, Shield of Faith, Sacred Rites, the mini explosion for the Paragon Warsuit, and she must be your Warlord if she's included in the list, unless there's another character with the same rule. Fortunately though, her Warlord trait is pretty good. In melee she strikes with the Lance of Illumination. It's a good general purpose weapon as it both has a sweep and a strike mode. The sweep attack is 10 attacks at strength 5, AP -2 and damage 1. The strike mode will just be her normal 5 attacks at strength 8, AP -3 and a flat damage of 3. On top of that, any wound rolls of a 6 will also cause 1 mortal wound on top of that. It's not too bad, but not enormously stand out on its own. But she combines that with a once per game ability to very helpfully be able to fight again in the fight phase after all other units have struck. It's a really helpful ability, and being able to just double your attacks on a turn when you get stuck into the nastiest threats of the enemy is a really good thing to have around. On top of that, her Warlord trait allows her to reroll all hits and wounds in melee, so if you're attacking with that strike mode, you've got a very good chance indeed of landing those 5 wounds with flat damage 3. We'll get on to the damage output in a second. For her ranged attacks, she gets to strike with a Paragon Missile Launcher and Fidelis, a Relic Heavy Bolter. Fidelis is just a standard heavy bolter with a strength of 6, so not enormously different there. But the Paragon Missile Launcher is a little bit more exciting. It's essentially a Cyclone Missile Launcher, a 36-inch strike with a choice of either frag or crack missiles. She'll be able to blaze forward with those on full accuracy as she advances, and it's pretty handy to have on a character that's likely to be in the middle of your battle line. It means that even if she isn't making combat, she's still going to be stacking some damage into the enemy. Finally, she does lead the Adepta Sororitas around her. You get an aura of reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 for all core Adepta Sororitas units within 6 inches. It's pretty handy that they can be from any order as well, so they're going to have a lot of additional damage output advancing alongside her. She basically does the job of a Canoness and Palatine rolled into one. On top of that, she has a command phase ability where she can select one core or character unit to reroll all hits and wounds. Again, we'll talk about that a bit more in the buff section, but she basically puts one unit into rage mode and might be able to get near enough double the damage out of it, depending on exactly what they're attacking. Overall, Vahl brings an absolute ton to the table. She's fairly quick, fairly durable, very good in a fight, provides some excellent command phase abilities, and a little bit of decent shooting as well. For a few numbers on her damage and durability in combat, with her Warlord trait active, 40 rolls to hit and wound, she'll kill around about 9 Imperial Guard, around 4 Space Marines, whether they're in Gravis armor or not, and will average around 11 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. Basically, she should be putting a hefty dent into any squad that she gets into, and then of course, provided she survives the counter-attack, she'll be able to fight all over again if she does happen to be tangling with something that's very hefty, maybe some of the enemy's elites. It is only once per game, but I still think that gives her the threat of using it when she needs it most, so you could basically double these numbers for the first time that she gets in combat, provided she hasn't engaged something that's going to kill her outright in return. Durability wise, these are the hits that it will be needed to kill her. She needs to be hit by 72 bolt rifles, 36 autocannon shots, and still a very big 12 las cannons or 9 dark lance hits. For a character, that's very good indeed. There's nothing that's absolutely enormously effective at bringing her down. Pretty much whatever the opponent's using, whether it's damage 1 or high damage weapons, they're just going to need a fair bit of volume fire. Probably the most effective shooting to try and kill her would be things that are AP -2 and maybe a flat damage 3 or damage D6. Perhaps high volume strength 6 fire with a bit of AP could also do some work. Toughness wise, she's really not bad at all, considering she also has character protection and most of the time you're not going to be able to shoot her directly. In terms of other things that can buff Vahl herself, of course the sisters won't be going anywhere without their miracle dice, and being a very big fighty character, she's got quite a lot of good uses for them. Guaranteeing a charge with all that melee damage could be a good use. Maybe some opportunistic damage rolls of 6 with the crack missiles, or maybe auto-passing an invul save, say if she was being targeted by something with excessive damage like Dark Lances, and you happen to have a miracle dice of 4 lying around. For Sacred Rites, like quite a lot of the Sisters' Codex, she could also make really good use of the exploding 6s in melee or +1 to charge, extra reliability with getting into combat or doing more damage when she's there. If she does have the exploding 6s active, then that would add an extra 20% to her damage output, which is no bad thing on top of her already good numbers. There aren't too many stratagems that she can make use of. The vehicle keyword locks her out of quite a lot of abilities. Command rerolls are going to be high value for rerolling invuls or making charges. She could maybe think about using a moment of grace to auto-pass some close saving throws. Provided you have miracle dice spare, it's really not hard to achieve with a 4+ invul. I would generally save that for when she's being targeted by really high damage weapons though. And for 1 command point, if she does get killed, you can use Martyred to lessen the blow slightly. You get D3+1 miracle dice for the loss of your warlord. Character-wise, for Vahl herself, not all that many of the sisters' buffs work on her. She isn't core or infantry and doesn't have the order keyword. I believe that she can make use of war hymns, potentially getting +1 attack. It's not bad with her rerolls, but maybe not as powerful as giving an entire unit +1 attack. And he could potentially use a Dialogus for a Sacred Rite or ignoring psychic powers. If you are wanting to run a character to try and support her, the Dialogus is likely the best. If she took the relic for multiple war hymns, you could potentially get Vahl with +1 attack, get the exploding 6s in melee if you don't already have it, and then also allow her to modify the use of her own miracle dice, adding +or -1 whenever she uses an act of faith. Unfortunately, most other buffs are locked out. She can't make use of things like that Word of the Emperor to strip invul saves from enemy combat units, and she doesn't have the order keyword. Quite apart from Vahl's proficient melee though, are her buffing abilities. Those reroll 1s to hit and wound will generally mean a 36% damage buff to most weapons on core units within 6 inches. Certainly not bad to have around, no matter what you're running in the army. The ability to reroll all hits and wounds for core or character units though is incredibly strong. For example, if you had a unit of 10 Sacrosants with maces who were guarding Vahl, and they got into melee with some Space Marine intercessors, if they had no buffs or sacred rites or anything, they'd kill around about 4 or 5 of them. If Vahl gives them her rerolls first, then you kill around about 8. It's an enormous plus 76% damage boost, which is pretty crazy. It gets even more spectacular though if you're going to be targeting anything that's very high toughness. Those Sacrosants with the maces would usually do around about 5 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. If you give them Vahl's rerolls, it goes up to 10 or 11. A pretty whopping 120% increase, so over double the damage that they would have normally been doing. It means that basically any core unit that you can put by Vahl could potentially have far higher value than it would normally. I feel in an ideal world you want to pair her with something that's both fast, tough and hard hitting. Fast to keep up with her, tough so it can screen for her, and a hard-hitting core unit so it can make great use of those rerolls. I do quite like the Celestian Sacrosants. They might move a little bit slower than Vahl, but they're pretty tough to take out with their 2+ saves and 4+ invuls, but their slightly lower strength attacks means that they gain an absolute ton from being able to reroll in melee. We talked about the numbers for those unbuffed Sacrosants before, but say if they happen to be Bloody Rose Sacrosants, getting +1 attack, extra AP -1, and they had the exploding 6s Sacred Rite active, with Vahl's rerolls, they'd do around about 20 wounds to a standard toughness 7 or 8 vehicle, and absolutely shred infantry or anything less tough. Not bad for a 140 point unit, and one that needs a fair bit of focus fire to be able to gun down. Zephyrim could maybe be a fun choice as well. They have the speed to keep up, and they'd love the 4 rerolls to wound with their low strength of 4, though they are a fair bit more fragile than the Sacrosanct point for point. The Paragon Warsuit sort of feels like the unit that Games Workshop wanted you to run alongside Vahl. They're a great unit to target with the rerolls both at ranged and in melee, with multi-melters and storm bolters going on, and to make great use of it in combat either with those maces that hit on 4s or the swords with their relatively low strength. I think that the challenge would just be trying to keep them alive. Their durability isn't terrible, though they do melt 2 high damage weapons relatively quickly, with only 4 wounds for 80 points. Now Sisters come in 20 model units. Potentially they could combo quite well as well. They could perhaps combine it with a Hymn of Battle to get the extra bolter AP, and use that stratagem to allow them to double fire at 24-inch range. Could potentially have up to 40 bolter shots, maybe throw in some Artificer Storm bolters, maybe even a couple of multi-melters as well, and that Blessed Bolt stratagem. And you've got a unit with an enormous amount of volume fire that will be able to stack a whole load of damage on whatever it fires at. You could even potentially throw in some multi-melters as well, and it wouldn't really matter too much about moving and shooting them, as Vahl's rerolls kind of take care of that. I guess there is quite a lot of investment to make one unit work though. You could even pair her with Celestine maybe for a fighty combat unit. She gets 2 mortal wounds on unmodified hit rolls of 6, so you could potentially just reroll all dice that aren't a 6 to try and maximise that, and also with her strength of 7 she'll very much like rerolls to wound 2. Finally, Retributors might also be an option, maybe a 10-strong squad to do a little bit of tanking of enemy fire, then have quad multi-melters on the go with an Armorium Cherub or 2. 4 rerolls to hit and wound or make them accurate even if they're moving around, and bonus points if they're Argent Shroud, I guess. I feel that just in general she maybe just doesn't pair quite as well with units like Repentia or Dominions, as they're likely to be piling out of Rhino transports to get into the fray, and Seraphim, which are quite likely to be wanting to deep strike. In general though, I think it's very hard to go wrong. You could even have multiple units around like this, maybe a big meaty unit of Sacrosancts or 2 to form the main battle line, followed up by a really big sister squad, and you could just throw the powerful buffs on whatever makes most sense at the time. If she's really stuck for a target, then 4 rerolls to hit and wound with her missile launcher and heavy bolter could be far worse. So putting this all together, it does seem that Morvenn Vahl is very strong and might indeed be a little bit overpowered. As I've seen quite a lot of people commenting online, it does seem that the vast majority of Sisters army lists would generally benefit from Morvenn Vahl. You only need to be using a big core unit or 2 and she's kind of worth it, in addition to everything else that she brings. I think she's likely to be found standing somewhere in the middle of the board, advancing towards the enemy and onto objectives, buffing Sisters shooting units as she moves up, plugging away with her own missile launchers and heavy bolter, and then going into rage mode when she gets into combat, and giving the opponent a fairly durable threat that they still really need to deal with, never mind the rest of the Sisters list. She's really easy to include in virtually any Sisters list with that Supreme Command attachment, and I do think it looks like Vahl is going to be a competitive staple going forward, just because of how much she brings to the table for the points that she costs. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Is Mrs. Vahl indeed a slightly overly strong HQ, and are we going to be seeing her leading the Sisters into battle into the far future? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly be keeping the 40k videos coming, new stuff coming out pretty much every day, and hopefully plenty more content for the Sisters of Battle. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which is how I can make quite so many videos quite so often. If you are enjoying regularly, then any support is enormously appreciated, as the videos do take a fair amount of time to make. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.